Good evening and welcome to Simpson at 8. I am your host, Lice Movono, sitting in for Stanley Simpson. The University of the South Pacific is the region's premier institution. Owned and funded by the governments of the Pacific Islands Forum, its alumni hold the most important positions of power across the region. Tonight we look at the biggest scandal ever to affect the university in its 50 years of existence. Laucala campus is the heart of the University of the South Pacific, the main breeding ground of the Pacific's leaders. Many of the island's top officials have received an education at USP since these gates opened in 1968. The USP celebrated its 50th anniversary in 2018 and in less than a year is shaken by its biggest scandal yet. At the center of the allegations is the former head of the university, Professor Rajesh Chandra, who led the USP between 2008 and 2018. Professor Chandra is accused of mismanagement and abuse, which include cronyism, double-dipping by senior staff, questionable promotions, payments of allowances and bonuses, which breach not only USP policy but also Fijian tax law. The allegations were in a report written by the USP's new Vice-Chancellor, Professor Paul Alualia, leaked to the public in March. The 11-page Alualia report submitted to the Executive Committee of the university's ruling body, the USP Council, called for accountability and action. Professor Alualia was appointed in May 2018. He had been Pro-Vice-Chancellor Research and Innovation at the University of Portsmouth in the United Kingdom. The USP is owned by the governments of 12 Pacific countries: Cook Islands, Fiji, Kiribati, Marshall Islands, Nauru, Niue, Solomon Islands, Tokelau, Tonga, Tuvalu, Vanuatu, and Samoa. Documents obtained by Simpson at 8 showed that Professor Alualia's report was the catalyst for years of documented complaints by senior USP staff dating back to 2013. The USP tasked New Zealand accounting firm BDO to examine the allegations with a preliminary investigation. BDO said USP's poor record-keeping prevented its investigators from substantiating all of the 26 allegations from the Alualia report. Further, it said governance was weak across the USP, as were the university's ability to control staff pay. Other observations include that USP's long-standing weak human resource and financial management capacity as being the root cause of many of the allegations. BDO agreed that some bonuses and allowance paid had breached university policy. At a staff forum chaired by Professor Alualia in August, USP staff demanded action. Present was famed Pacific poet Dr. Kanai Helu-Thaman, who described the period detailed in the Alualia report as being the worst in USP history when she saw very bad behavior. Dr. Morgan Tuimailea-Liifano, professor in history and coordinator of history at the USP's School of Social Sciences, kept track of these troubles.
The evidence of our awareness comes from the numerous complaints, particularly the way staff members were treated and the way some decisions were overruled, were overturned, and over the years they accumulated and very little was being done. Sometimes when these complaints were lodged, the general response was that we have to check on our procedures to make sure that they were working, and so this is getting a bit tiresome.
Professor Morgan said the staff body, which had been behind moves to expose the alleged abuse, is happy the public is aware of the troubles at USP, but they'd like to see more detailed findings of the BDO investigation.
This is nothing new. So when the exposure of these allegations came, we knew about it, but we just didn't didn't have anybody who was courageous and powerful enough to be in a position to expose these mismanagement, these areas of problems inside. Even though that was these releases came from the council, I think people were not happy. They weren't happy with the summary, with the executive summary provided by BDO, because it was generalized, it was broad, and the terms of reference of the BDO was that they were to look specifically at the allegations mentioned and specified in the Vice Chancellor's report. But the executive summary completely overlooked that. It never said anything. It didn't specify any of those 16 allegations that the Vice Chancellor specified. Nothing. And that's what people were more concerned about. And as you know, the union, particularly the support staff union, they had not been paid. They hadn't seen any pay rise over the last 3 or 4 years. And every time they raised their concerns about the pay rise, the standard answer was, there's no money. If there was no money for the support staff, where did this money come from to pay these people? Rewards that appeared in the Vice Chancellor's exposure, it seemed as if it was the same people, and the same people that were the beneficiaries of the Vice Chancellor's decisions.
Dr. Morgan said the people of the Pacific whose governments own the University of the South Pacific should want to know more about what is happening at their university.
Why they should be worried? This is their money. These are their fees. The students are paying fees. And their parents are paying taxes. And the university is a tax-funded public institution. That means it's being funded by taxpayers' money. It's not a corporation, it's not a private institution. This is a publicly funded institution by fees and by taxpayers' money, and therefore it should be accountable. It should be held accountable to the public. We applauded the appointment of an independent investigation, and then secondly, we were also concerned that the appointment should be independent. We were worried about the independence of the investigator, no conflict of interest, and that it should be transparent. And we made it known to the council and to ARC that we reserve the right to sue them if there is any conflict of interest, if the findings compromises the independence of the investigation. And at the moment, what we have is a very generalized summary, and we're not happy with that, because the terms of reference was to address the specifics which were specified in the 11-page document by the VCP. But as you saw and everybody saw, nothing. It's important then to know what the truth, and the only way to find out is release the full report. And besides, who pays for the report? It's you and I, the students and their fees. It's us as the taxpayers.
That was Dr. Morgan Tuimailea Ifano, who was part of the staff movement to expose abuse at USP. Next, we find out how this has affected teaching. Welcome back. In this segment, we talked to Dr. Sunil Kumar, Senior Lecturer in Economics, about how some of the services at USP have deteriorated. While USP staff have stood by its new Vice-Chancellor, Professor Alualia, many fear a lengthy investigation will ensue with no real corrective measures for the short term. Economics lecturer Dr. Sunil Kumar said the alleged abuse had practical impacts on his ability to teach.
The indications in the report is clear that there has been some instances, not some, but I presume widespread instances of mismanagement of policies and funds and all kinds of resources that we are familiar with at USP. Well, when there is mismanagement of resources, then obviously the institution will go through constraints. We were all faced with constraints, particularly those who are engaged in delivering the mainstream, the mainstream objectives of the institution, which means teaching and research. There were very basic things that we were stifled of. For instance, we would not be really allowed to buy textbooks or reference books, our printer materials. There would be strict policies on it, which means that the monies, the resources were draining out elsewhere, and mainstream teaching materials were not made available the way it should have been. You see, there are lots of things that we used to do in good times. We used to go out in the regions and teach. We used to build cohorts in different regional countries. Within Fiji, we used to go out of Suva and build cohorts where we were delivering different courses and programs for the students. And under this administration, all these activities were stifled. And even now, we are almost in the same constraint that the resources are not being released for some of these mainstream activities that we are supposed to engage in. A lot of our staff members, we have been expressing the element of bad governance that happened in the last 5, 6 or 7 years during the last Vice Chancellor's period. We pointed out some of the issues that were directly affecting us, but we have stayed here long enough to understand what were the problems in the institution. The institutions actually suffered very drastically in the last so many years under the former Vice Chancellor's leadership. So those were the things that we expressed, which I think has made sense. But what I would like to say is that there has been so much bad behavior, bad conduct in terms of how the university was being run. The main delivery, the mainstream activities of the university was actually stifled, as I have said. The administrative support for the Vice Chancellor, his office and his group of people was actually expanding during the period.
Dr. Kumar said some of the more critical operational aspects of the university had deteriorated over the years. He said many of those who were responsible for or benefited from the abuse are even now still at USP.
OHS issues, for instance, in our faculty, we have the physical infrastructure, which is very troubling. There are policy matters, there are staffing matters, our ITS. ITS is one of the most important components of our means of delivery. All these need urgent attention because they have been ignored for a long time. They were neglected for a long time. I would assume for 7 years at least. The actual maintenance and so on, the right kind of approach to it were not taken. So this is the problem, and you have probably seen the burnt out building at the back. That is one glaring result of negligence on the part of the past Vice Chancellor, because he did not release resources for those buildings to be upgraded and to be maintained in the right way to sustain the the ongoing increase in the load. IT capacity in terms of its power consumption capacity and all those things were actually suffering under that leadership when I presume the resources were being diverted to the wrong places. For that reason, I think there were very few opportunities in which staff would have brought it up. And a lot of times in these such governance issues, the power hierarchy determines. Even when things are going wrong, Even when you try and voice out some of the things, they won't be heard. And that was the situation. But nonetheless, we would expect all those issues to be taken on board and immediate actions to be taken to address them. We are short of staff. We have not been appointing professors. Senior staff are not there. And the younger staff that would lead to capacity building are almost totally non-existent. The current leadership of the university will have to address that urgently, and it's a policy matter. The employment opportunities that could have been aligned properly have not been done. The local young, very intelligent people who actually graduated from our university, who could have joined us in terms of that capacity building, didn't happen, because university, the USP, is no longer that institution where people really want to work. Academic work requires a lot of creative thinking. When you have a troubled situation, when you have a troubled environment, you can't think properly. And I would see that continuing if these current issues are not handled properly. There are also the old elements who actually behaved badly under the old leadership are still there.
That was Dr. Sunil Kumar, currently the Senior Economics Lecturer at USP. In the next segment, the former head of USP, who was at the center of these allegations, has his say. Professor Rajesh Chandra was the longest-serving Vice-Chancellor in USP history. He published a lengthy defense against the accusations in the Ahluwalia report. Meanwhile, VC Chandra took to local media to respond to both the Ahluwalia report and the BDO investigation. In a 2-page opinion piece in the Fiji Sun newspaper, he said he had worked within the confines of his position and the powers accorded to him by the USP governance policy. Professor Chandra said the University of the South Pacific had been at its most profitable during his leadership, pointing out that Fiji's anti-corruption body had not seen fit to investigate him. Professor Chandra maintained his innocence. While he hasn't responded specifically to all the allegations in the Ahluwalia report, Professor Chandra said the USP Vice-Chancellor's Ordinance of 2015 and the USP Staff Ordinance of 2017 gave him authority for most of the decisions highlighted in the Ahluwalia report. Professor Chandra, who is now the Chancellor of the Fiji National University, has called on the USP Council to clear his and the names of other senior University of the South Pacific staff implicated in the Ahluwalia report. USP staff have since taken to the media to rebut that response. The BDO investigative summary has called for a further forensic review of the University of the South Pacific. Professor Ahluwalia told Simpson at 8 that a team of government ministers from across the region would oversee further investigations into the allegations. That team is Samoa's Deputy Prime Minister Afionga Fiame Naomi Mataafa, the Cook Islands Prime Minister Henry Puna, and Fiji's Attorney General Ayaz Sayed-Khaiyum. No time frame was given on when these investigations would take place. That is all we have time for tonight. Join us every Thursdays at 8 p.m. You were watching Simpson at 8. Good evening.